Chapter 17. Castelnuovo di Conza. For he who lives more lives than one, more deaths than one must die. The Ballad of Gaol, Oscar Wilde. A glass of wine, a delicious dinner, and some fresh, crispy bread were all it took to restore their enthusiasm. Dan could not come to terms with what he and Gustavo had just experienced. They had lived some other men's lives, and these other men were members of their family. They had been, if only in spirit, sharing the actions and thoughts of Antonio Ricciulli and Constanzo Ricciulli for a span of several months during 2 different periods of their lives. I will not say it often enough, Damianos, this is an incredible journey, Dan said, reclining in his chair, still sipping on his coffee. What is so incredible about it? You were transported into an era where your ancestors left an important imprint on the lives of thousands of people. You were due to realize that accomplishments often stem from great sacrifices. But should I consider my life as Antonio Ricciulli a sacrifice in anything? Perhaps not, however. I should remind you that you faced a fierce enemy by simply ignoring him, and this at great cost to you personally. You mean ignoring him was a form of sacrifice? Not as much as resigning from the Belcastro bishopric was. You practically renounced your vows at the time. You wanted nothing to do with the church that imposed payment for absolution of the penance sins. Mind you, the Red Cardinal lived in hell while trying to reach the hand of God. His health was the worst throughout his reign, or should I say his apostasy. But didn't he upload the prospects of the church? Gustavo queried. Not really. He made his own religion. He wrote his own doctrines, and although he appeared faithful to God, he made others suffer only because he had the power to do so. He loved to see people subservient to his desires. He bent the rules and broke many of them to serve his own purpose. That is the reason I call his reign as a cardinal the one of an apostate. But isn't he hailed as a great man in many historical records? Dan asked. Yes, but he is only painted that way to excuse the church's error on his account. You see, for some 70 years during and after his reign as a cardinal, the church had to uphold and support their decisions and make their misguidance of the flock. It would have been a mistake to say the church had been ignorant of Ricciulli's ill-conceived actions. He fought to gain control of the church through insidious means and devious deeds. You heard of what he did to Umili di Bisiano, Campanile. The Inquisitor of Naples was just another of Ricciulli's puppets, yet the Lord never let Umili be deceived by these unethical maneuvers. Remember what he said, the only thing I say to God is, Lord, forgive the sins of all human beings and make them love you as they are obliged to love you. These words were specifically addressed to Ricciulli. They are obliged to love the God, and he meant it. There is something that bothers me about the last hours I spent as Antonio Ricciulli, though, Dan said. I felt extremely tired and in constant need of rest, even though I know that only my spirit occupied his body. Why was I physically tired? Damianos smiled. Dan frowned. In his mind there was nothing amusing about his query. I suppose it is quite difficult to understand what is happening to you every time you relive the life of one of your ancestors, Damianos replied. You see, I can understand how you feel, since I have to adopt the personality of and metamorphosize my body into people as many times as the circumstances demand. And to answer your question, you're not only entering this person's body and occupying his mind, you are him for the time you relive that life. Reliving past lives is not just occupying someone's mind for a time, it's actually being the person you were hundreds of years ago. Although, all right, I suppose I can accept that, Dan agreed. But why was I so tired? Was I sick when I left Lucantonio's castle? Perhaps you were feeling the effects of your age. In that era, men rarely lived past their 70s. Oscar Wilde said, for he who lives more lives than one, more deaths than one must die. Which means that as many lives as you relive, as many deaths you may have to face. Antonio was at the end of his own life. Remember, he returned to the Roseto castle to die. Dan nodded. The average person died around the age of 60 or 65. Medicine wasn't at all what it was in the next millennium, and people indulged in many more addictions than one would care to admit. For example, cocaine and heroin were drugs commonly used to curb various ailments. Really? Gustavo sounded truly amazed. Oh yes, I do not have records of potions of this kind used in the 17th century, but I certainly can show you some of today's newspaper advertisements to prove my point. And as if by magic, Damianos then pulled a folded sheet of newsprint out of the breast pocket of his jacket. Here, have a look at these, he added, pointing at the ads in question. I see, even the Pope is enjoying a drop of tonic now and then, Gustavo said, a smirk on his lips. Yes, and this particular wine was first created by Angelo Mariana from Corsica in 1863. The wine itself, The wine itself was a good Bordeaux, but what made it so popular was the Peruvian cocaine leaves extract mixed with it. It was more than a tonic, it was a very addictive beverage. If you want to see a bottle, I would think the innkeeper would have one in stock yet, Damianos added, getting to his feet and going to the bar. A moment later he came back with a bottle and 3 glasses. Would you like a taste? He asked Dan. No, not me, thanks. I don't think I would want to become addicted to anything at this stage of our journey. I'll have a sip, Gustavo said, visibly keen to have a taste of this unusual wine. As soon as he had taken a sip, he smiled. This is amazing, Dan. You should really try it. I've never tasted anything like it. All right, then, let me have a little to taste, Dan said, grinning. There you go, Damianos said, as he poured a finger at the bottom of the glass. You're right, Gustavo, Dan said, after savouring a mouthful of the red wine. This is quite different than any Bordeaux wine I have ever tasted. He took another sip, and I can understand someone getting addicted to it. It's such a pleasant taste. That's exactly why people, even the Pope, were drinking it, yet it took years before the after effects of these wines or potions or lotions were detected. They were ultimately banned in the early 20th century. I think you should give the bottle back to the innkeeper, Gustavo said. It's really too tempting a wine to sit on this table, he guffared. Yes, I think that's a good idea, Dan rejoined, looking at Damianos. Perhaps I shall keep it safe somewhere, just in case we need a pick-me-up during our next journey. And where are we going? Dan asked. You remember my mentioning your great-granduncle, Generoso Ricciulli Conti? Yes, I do remember, Dan said. And where did the man live, did you say? I think I recall you saying something about Castelnuovo di Conza, didn't you? Gustavo added. Exactly. Tomorrow morning we will take a carriage to the town of Castelnuovo. It's not very far, and it will certainly take us a day and a half to get there. And why would that be, Damianos? Gustavo asked. Couldn't you snap your fingers and surprise us with our landing somewhere new again? Damianos guffared, shook his head. Not this time, Gustavo. There are a few places to visit between Salerno and our destination, and the mountainside is quite magnificent to see. He crossed his arms over his chest. And perhaps we could spend the night where your wife's family used to live, Gustavo. Which wife was that? The latter inquired, a comical grin draping over his lips. You remember your leaving the religious order to join a young woman in Salerno? Oh, yes, I met a wonderful woman. Gustavo stopped in mid-sentence. I can't even remember her name at the moment. Very strange, I saw her quite vividly a second ago, and then her face disappeared. He fixed his gaze on Damianos. Why would that be? That's because the memory of the young woman is not really yours to keep, Gustavo. Constanzo is the one who will hold that memory for all eternity. You have not lived that part of his life, so you wouldn't be able to recall the events that occurred during your union. Anyway, I'm glad to know she was beautiful, gorgeous actually. It was with laughter and a few more recollections that the 3 men ended their evening before going to bed. As promised, in the morning a carriage was waiting for the 3 men in front of the inn. They had eaten a hearty breakfast and were ready for the long journey that would take them to the northern tip of the province of Salerno, practically at the centre of Italy. Within an hour of their departure, Dan felt that something was wrong with the carriage. They were hobbling more than usual along the road, was still relatively flat and deprived of the usual ruts. He put his head out the window and looked down. He was right. One of the wheels was about to leave its axle. If they didn't stop now and attempt to make some repairs before they reached hostelry for the night, they would be sleeping under the stars tonight. Surprising himself, Dan hollered at the driver in Italian. Stop the carriage immediately. Stop it, I say. What's wrong, Dan? Gustavo asked, standing up to join his friend at the window. Good grief, that's not going to be simple to fix, he said. I'll just hope he's got some tools to mend that wheel. The driver had now climbed down from his perch and was looking at the damaged wheel. I can't believe this, he said, obviously annoyed. I've given the man at the hostel 3 coins to repair the wheel last night. I rather think he cheated me. He looked up at Damianos, who had stepped out of the carriage by now. My apologies, my good signors, but I don't know how to repair a wheel. Have you some tools under the bench up there, Arnaldo? Damianos asked, pointing at the driver's perch. Yes, I do, but I do not know what to do, truly. Well, don't just stand there, then, Damianos urged. Get us the tools, and we will see if we can make the appropriate repairs. My companions have some knowledge in this regard, I believe. He switched his gaze from Dan to Gustavo in turn. We can try, Dan said. Let's first see what the man has in his toolbox. A few moments later the driver came down carrying a heavy wooden box, which Dan and Gustavo grabbed from him. As they put it down and opened it, they were pleasantly surprised by the assortment of useful tools it contained. Dan immediately took the lead, and with Gustavo's assistance, secured the carriage upward on some stones, which they had found in the nearby ditch, and which they had inserted under its sash. They took the will off and examined the shaft. It was rusted and needed to be replaced. Gustavo rummaged through the box while Ronaldo took the harnesses off the horses and let the two of them graze in the nearby field. Fortunately, there was a replacement shaft in the box, and Dan had the wheel repaired soon enough. However, now his hands were filthy with dirt, grime, and grease. He looked up at both Damianos and Gustavo and erupted in laughter in front of their astonished faces. "Did you lose a wheel inside your brain too?" Gustavo asked, joining in the laughter. "No, Gustavo, but I just remembered the time I was restoring cars in another era." "Oh yes, I remember you describing some of the cars you restored, and I guessed you were a grease pot then too." "Not quite, but yes, I got my hands dirty once in a while." As soon as the wheel was back on its axle and the carriage lowered to the ground again, Ronaldo came rushing from the field with his horses running on either side of him. Thank you, senors," he said as he readjusted the harness to each of the animals. "I'll make sure to get my coins back when I return to Salerno. The thief will not steal from anyone any more." "I do hope you get your money back, Ronaldo," Dan said. "But now could you lead us to the next house or water well so I could wash myself?" Yes, of course, senor, right away." It wasn't long before they arrived at the house located not far from the road and seemingly in good upkeep. The moment they entered the courtyard, the lady of the house opened the front door and stood on the stoop, hands on her hips. "And what do you think you're doing, Ronaldo?" she bellowed up the drive. "I have no bed to share with you, nor food to give." As the driver climbed down, he exploded in roaring laughter and went to kiss the young woman on her forehead. "I do not want to bed you tonight, dear Sophia, nor do I want food, only a jug of water for my passenger." She looked over Ronaldo's shoulder. "Who's the passenger? I hope he's respectful and minds his manners. This is not the inn." "Have no fear, signorina," Damianos said as he stepped out of the carriage, Dan and Gustavo in tow. "My young friends here have assisted your man Ronaldo to repair a faulty wheel on his carriage, and he would only bother you for a few minutes, just enough time for him to wash his hands and face." "That will be fine then," Sophia replied, curtsying in front of Ronaldo's passengers. "Come with me," she told Dan, leading the way inside the house. "What's your name?" Not hesitating, and to his own astonishment, Dan replied, "Generoso Ricciulli, signorina."